Now, two of my guests tonight are observers of life on our planet. One is the evergreen David Attenborough, the other the ever-entertaining Eddie Izzard. Music from Chris Rea and David Gray. My first guest is journalist, cook, author, sex symbol, domestic goddess. Her television programmes have been described as seduction on toast. Another writer described her as chummy, plummy, yummy and funny. Ladies and gentlemen, Nigella Lawson. Well, you said, how can I live up to that? I know, but it's extraordinary the way that journalists stretch their vocabulary writing about you, and it's international too.
Not only their vocabulary.
The New York Times, her sexy roundness makes cooking dinner with Nigella look like a prelude to an orgy. That's America. Australia, she's the Moll Flanders of cookery shows.
No, I haven't heard the one. I like your accent, may I say.
Do you like that? You just keep your top lip straight like to the passionate superstar of food porn. There you are. And you go, I mean, have they missed the point or what? I mean,
well, I don't think of myself as peddling pornography in the sense that I quite like the idea of everyone joining in. I think pornography is just about viewing in a rather disconnected way. But, you know, I'm fine with the idea of a culinary come-on because I'm interested in food, and in a way, what is the point of talking about food unless you arouse people's appetites?
But what interests you about food? What is it about food that makes you so passionate about it and interested in it?
Well, I'm greedy.
That's the best reason of all, I suppose.
I think so. I don't, you know, I'm very nervous when people talk about it as a great art. I mean, I think one of the interesting things about cooking is that it's practical, but there is an element that goes beyond that. But, you know, I started doing more cooking in a sense when I used to have to write a column or something like that. I would find just stirring something or chopping something would let me think about things in a way.
Yes.
And then I realised that actually there was a lot to be said for mindless, repetitive activity. And that's why I went into television. So I like cooking and I like eating and I like that thing of feeding people. I mean, when we make the programmes, you know, at the beginning there's a big sort of health and safety thing and no one's allowed to eat the food. If they do, that's at their own risk. You're not covered by insurance, and I take it all very personally. But what I like about the fact is the minute the director says cut, you know, the camera's down and everyone's eating the food. And in a way, it doesn't interest me if I'm not feeding people.
But the style of presentation, which has earned you this celebrity in a sense, I mean, it has made a huge difference. I mean, was that contrived? I mean, not to start with, but did you get this sense of, right, we've got something here, it's a good gimmick this, let's extend it, let's play on it?
No, I don't think so. I have to say, it was very difficult after the first series, because when you do the first series, you're just doing what you do without any thought really of being seen, which is maybe a naive thing to say when you're doing television, but of course when you're doing it, you're just doing it. And then once critics have said things or viewers have said things, then you start thinking, I don't want to get self-conscious, which is why actually I never watch the programme. But, you know, a lot of it is what's done in the editing room and how it's done on camera.
It's
you know.
It's you.
Well,
it's your
I babble.
personality.
I tell you what, I do it. I'm not scripted. I just go into this kind of babble that you hear now.
Yes.
And
about
so,
disemboweling lemons.
Yeah.
And putting your hands into soft and. Well, I mean, it gets them going wherever it is, Nigella. I mean,
I like doing it, and I think that's quite important.
Well, again, I mean, it doesn't work unless you're enthusiastic.
No, I know.
I mean, that's the other thing that comes across. I mean, we've got the greatest exponent of that coming on later on, David Attenborough.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, never lost that sense of wonder about things. But I mean, what's interesting to you? You're a journalist. I mean, and so if you were writing a column now, and you looked at yourself...
I would be so horrible about myself.
Would you?
Yeah.
Oh, would you really?
Actually, the funny thing is, when How to Be a Domestic Goddess came out, and I was, you know, railed against for being, you know, a traitor to the sisterhood, despite the fact that it was so obviously ironic, I felt, you know, if I'd been filing a column, I would have done exactly the same. So I feel fine, you know. We've all got inches to fill, so therefore, let's not worry about it.
But what about when you satirise, when the comedians get hold of you, when they send you up? What do you think about that? You've seen that happen, haven't you? You don't.
Yes, but if it makes me laugh, I'm fine. I mean, I don't take myself seriously, I can tell you.
No, well, that's
I mean, there's not the opportunity for that.
A prerequisite of being in television to do that. But I mean, what about Dead Ringers? Do you see that sketch?
I did. I thought it was So funny.
All right, well, I think it's funny too, but let's have a look at this, because I think it's a wonderful, wonderful sketch.
So plunge your hands into this bowl of lovely chopped fresh fruit. Should be really oozing with juices. Well, it could be oozing with juices. Could be any similarly sexual connotation, really, like pink and fleshy or succulent and ripe, whatever, really. Irritatingly, as well as being stunningly beautiful, I'm apparently a really nice person as well. So bringing out the thumb first, and then each finger in turn, and sucking each one really languidly and erotically, so that nobody really gives a toss what you're cooking anyway.
It's very funny.
Yeah.
I like the way they get the camera work exactly right as well.
Yes, it's a correct impression
You know, I
of the
never
style.
mean anything. When I read or something that's meant to be a do-God
Nigella.
blonde, I never mean it like that.
You do, you can, you must do.
No, I don't. This is what's pathetic. I really don't.
I'm not talking to some naive young person.
Thank you for reminding me
I'm talking to a
past
woman
my
of the
youth.
world. Moll Flanders, indeed.
Yeah.
She came to a sticky end, if I remember rightly.
She did. She had fun on the way.
She did. Were you from a foodie family? I mean, your dad was Nigella Lawson, who was a journalist, and then, of course, Chancellor of the Exchequer. Your brother Dominic is an editor. You had sisters. I mean, was it a family centred around food?
Yep.
Was it?
Well, a greedy family. I mean, I wouldn't say that... It's not about talking about sort of rarefied dishes, but I do seem to remember when people came round for tea, they were always surprised to see, you know, when you were eating, we would be talking about other meals we had eaten or what we might be having later on in the week. And then, of course, when I was a child, it wasn't really done to talk about food.
Yes.
In a way, it wasn't a big deal. It was considered very, I don't know, slightly distasteful. It wasn't polite.
You read when I read about you, you seem to have been a strange child. Sort of quiet, stubborn child.
I wasn't. Well, maybe I was stubborn. Maybe stubborn people never realise they're stubborn. They just think everyone else is being difficult.
What about your attitude toward examinations? I mean, that was a stubborn streak, wasn't it? What did you do
Well,
there?
that's partly to do with the age I was brought up in, because I'd been to progressive school, and when I did the 11 plus, I put my hand up and I said, but I was doing maths, and I said, excuse me, I don't do this. Because I'd been to a school where you only did, you know, what you felt like. So consequently, by the age of 9, I'd read all the Brontes, but I'd never done any maths or anything like that. In fact, later on, when geography was made compulsory, my father, who considered himself a man with some authority, went to school and said, it's really ridiculous, Nigella really doesn't have to do geography to O-level, and I don't think it's necessary. And they said, sorry, it's compulsory. She absolutely has to. So then my mother wrote a letter saying, Nigella is far too highly strung for a subject like geography. And I was the only girl in the school who didn't have to do it. Imagine how much the geography mistress liked me.
I don't think it's strange at all. You've got great common sense, actually. But you talked earlier about the part that cooking had played in your life, and again, reading about you, it seems to me that at kind of crucial and stressful times in your life that you've turned to cooking as well. For instance, you wrote your first book after your mother had died young, and your sister too. Both had died when they were young people, basically. And you immersed yourself in writing a book then.
It took me a while to be able to do that. I think when everything was too raw, I couldn't. And then later, I think food is about life. And writing about food is about accepting being alive and actually enjoying it. And it was also a way of kind of continuing conversations I'd had with them, because conversations in my family run something like, what did you have for lunch? What are you going to have for dinner? And so I didn't have the chance to speak to them. And so I just was chatting in that way.
So we're working through it. And then, of course, when your husband, John Diamond, he had cancer too. And then again, you threw yourself into your work then, didn't you, for an obvious reason, in a sense?
Well, I had to earn money. That
Yes.
was, a very good reason.
I suppose it was also a way of
and I could do it, and I could
coping.
work at home.
Yes.
It's certainly true. I'm never quite comfortable about the idea of it as therapy, in the sense that it assuages in some sense, but it also is. I think it's better to be occupied. I think that when you try and relax with a capital R is when your anxieties rise to the surface. And I think on the whole it's better to do things than to sit around. So I would find it was just a way of maybe keeping calm but also busy, and I think it's important to be busy. But as I say, I also needed to find a way of earning money without leaving the house.
John also found his own way around it too, his problem, by writing about it. It became public. We had a weekly column that he wrote about it, there was a play done about it, a book about it.
I used to say, when's the T-shirt coming out?
Did it, I mean, you see, what one read about when you read John's column was this kind of, almost in a sense, cheery summary of a terrible, terrible problem. Was it like that, really?
Well, it wasn't. I mean, John was a very, very funny person, so the funniness was completely him. But what fits into 800 words is not a whole life. And, you know, the torture and the misery and the rage, completely justifiable, can't come through. So in a way, I think it was very helpful in some respects to John writing the column. But on the other hand, it meant maybe everything was slightly held at a distance because it became a journalistic problem, which he said, you know, of himself.
Yes, I understand.
But on the other hand, you know, rereading them, they are incredibly wonderful columns.
Oh, and what about the business? You suffering the three losses, three people that you loved dearly, very close to you, all of whom died young from cancer. I mean, what view is that? How has that affected you and your view of the world?
I don't think it's made me into always the most charitable person. I mean, I think suffering is meant to make you better, but I do feel sometimes, you know, full of rage at the world.
Like what?
I feel there's a great need in the world, I think, because everyone wants everything to be nice and okay, to try and, you know, see a reason in what happens, or to see patterns, to make sense of things. And I think that, you know, the world is full of great random cruelties, and what is unacceptable is unacceptable. So I don't suddenly turn into someone who says, well, that's how things are meant to be. But on the other hand, I do feel that life is very precious and should be enjoyed. So you know, much as I will say that to you now, I try not to go around in a kind of rant and a gloom, and try and feel that I'm lucky to be alive and to make the most of it.
After he died, shortly after he died, you became attached to another man. And some people criticised you in the press for that, thinking it unseemly. Perhaps there was not a decent period of mourning. I think that was the thrust of their argument. What was your attitude toward that?
Well, you know, I think that life is so different from the inside and from the outside, and I think probably I'd have felt the same looking at it from the outside, but when you go through something in life, you really haven't got time to think about how something seems. You have to feel that you're doing what's right, and I suppose you have to grasp onto life, and you can't think, oh, I'm going to wait for a decent interval and then decide to fall in love, because bad things happen and good things happen.
Sure.
And one has very little control over either, I mean, in terms of just chance occurrences. So I understand what people feel, but as long, I suppose, as, you know, I feel as long as my family is happy, you know, my children are happy, and
they are.
They are. I mean, they've had an enormous loss, and that can't be made good. But they're happy. And I suppose that's important. I can't really be worrying all the time about what people think, as long as I feel I can give an account of my behaviour to myself.
And John, of course, himself gave you his blessing, didn't he? I mean, in his column, he said you better take those wedding pictures down.
Yes, I know. And I
might
say,
ruin your
please.
chances.
I know. He did. He used to say, I like to think of them really queuing around the block. And I used to say, please, will you stop it? But I think that maybe this is something that if you have a resolved and good relationship with someone, there's not that sense of having to justify or to have those sort of questions or remorse, so that maybe it is possible to move on. I mean, moving on doesn't mean you forget or that someone ceases to be part of your life. Yeah. I think there's a difference.
Again, looking at the effect that your work has on your life, or the way that your work responds to your life, in a sense. This new book that you've got out, the new program that you've been doing on Channel 4, I mean, that reflects a new opening for you, doesn't it? A new attitude, if you like.
Well, I suppose so. I mean, it is, you know, am
I seeing something into it that's not there?
No, I think you're right. This notion of forever summer, which was in a way, I suppose it sounds as if everything now, oh, everything's great, you know, the blossom's out, we can all have sunshine forever. And I certainly didn't mean that, but I think it's true to say that the two books I'd done previously were were rather imbued with an atmosphere of the curtains were closed and you were clinging to the kitchen for comfort and warmth.
Yes, yes.
And this is more outward looking.
Yes.
But on the whole, I still think, you know, there's light and shade in life at all times, I think, and I wouldn't want to be too blindly optimistic about anything, except that I suppose, you know, I am happy, and that's a good thing.
Oh, that's the most important thing. And of course your career is really on the up and up internationally, because not only here but in America too, as I said, and in Australia as well. So how are you taking the international start a bit in America? Have you...
Well, the thing is, it's just quite nice to be doing something a bit different.
Yes.
I mean, it's sort of much the same, but it's different, and I quite like going to America and doing it. Of course, it's such a huge country that I never go to teeny-weeny little bits of it. But anyway, you know, that's fun.
What about, though, the future? I mean, looking ahead, because, I mean, you're now... I'm all right, you have this reserve that a lot of journalists have or pretend to have about being, you know, on television. Oh, really, it's not me, really. But, of course, it's...
I'm afraid it is me.
It is you. It's great fun.
And I don't have the talent to be anyone else.
You fit it and it suits you too. So therefore, the question is, of course, I mean, where do you see the future? I mean, will it always be in this area of television, or do you have ambition beyond that?
Well, I have no idea. You know, I've never planned a thing in my life. I always kind of feel I just lurch from crisis to crisis, and that suits me, and then I deal with what happens. I mean, I had no idea I would ever be a food writer. I mean, the idea that I'd be doing a cooking show, I mean, I couldn't have imagined it, so I've got no idea what I'll end up doing. Probably that's just as well.
Nigella Lawson, thank you very much indeed. Nigella Lawson. Well done. Music now.